Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
In May 1945, during the final days of World War II, something impossible happened. American and German soldiers fought side by side. The setting was Castle Itter in Austria, a medieval fortress that the Nazi SS used as a luxury prison for high-value French prisoners. When the war was clearly lost, a group of German Wehrmacht soldiers decided to desert and join the Americans to defend the castle against a fanatical SS attack. It was the only recorded battle in which the two enemy armies fought together. Among the prisoners in the castle were two former prime ministers of France, a general, and a tennis star. The SS wanted to execute them before the Allies arrived. That is why Americans, German deserters, and even the French prisoners themselves took up arms to defend the fortress. The battle lasted hours, with the defenders clearly outnumbered. When American reinforcements finally arrived, they found a surreal scene. Mortal enemies fighting shoulder to shoulder. It was one of the last battles of the war in Europe, and certainly the strangest. A wave of molasses. It sounds absurd, but it killed 21 people in Boston. In January 1919, an industrial tank 50 feet tall burst without warning, releasing nearly 2.3 million gallons over the North End neighborhood. The viscous mass advanced at 35 miles per hour, swallowing everything in its path. Horses, carts, people. The elevated train structure was torn away, buildings collapsed, entire streets disappeared under the dark mass. For weeks, Boston smelled of molasses, and some families never saw their relatives again. This is Sir George Pearce, the Australian Minister of Defence, who, in 1932, declared war on 20,000 emus. Yes, the giant birds. Farmers in Western Australia were desperate. After World War I, enormous flocks of emus migrated to the wheat plantations, destroying entire harvests. The government's solution? Send soldiers armed with Lewis machine guns to exterminate the feathered threat. What could go wrong? Spoiler, practically everything. Australian soldiers soon discovered that emus are formidable adversaries. The birds dispersed into small groups at the first sign of danger, making it impossible to hit more than a few at a time. They ran at 30 miles per hour and seemed to ignore injuries that would bring down any other animal. After spending nearly 10,000 rounds of ammunition, the military managed to kill fewer than 1,000 birds. The operation commander compared the emus to gorillas and admitted that the birds faced machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. The operation was cancelled. Australia lost the war to the emus. In the early 20th century, Bayer marketed heroin as a cough medicine, without a prescription, recommended even for children. The company guaranteed that the substance did not cause addiction and was safer than morphine. Doctors prescribed it, pharmacies sold it, families gave it to their children. Millions of addicts in the following decades proved that the advertising was a lie. December 3rd, 1930. The Muse Valley, in Belgium, awoke under a dense fog that seemed harmless, but carried death. In a few days, 64 people were dead. Thousands suffered from severe respiratory problems. What no one knew was that the surrounding factories had released sulfuric acid into the atmosphere, and the thermal inversion trapped the invisible poison over the population. Ships stopped. Trains were cancelled. And entire families suffocated inside their own homes, not understanding why they could not breathe. Queen Elizabeth personally visited the city of Angus after the disaster, trying to console the families devastated by the tragedy. But justice? That never came. The factories of the Muse Valley were never held responsible for the deaths. Belgian authorities maintained that the presence of deadly sulfuric acid in the atmosphere was the result of an unfortunate chain of events and rare weather phenomena. The population that survived had to live with the fact that 64 neighbors died and no one paid for it. This image shows a B-52 bomber refueling in the air with a KC-135 tanker aircraft. Exactly as it should have happened over Palomares, Spain, in January 1966. But it did not happen. During the refueling maneuver, the two planes collided in mid-flight at more than 30,000 feet altitude. The explosion killed 7 crew members instantly, and then came the real problem. The B-52 was carrying 4 thermonuclear hydrogen bombs. 3 fell on land, contaminating crops with plutonium. The 4th disappeared into the Mediterranean Sea. The search for the lost bomb in the Mediterranean lasted 80 days and involved dozens of ships, submarines, and divers. When it was finally located at nearly 3,000 feet deep, the Americans breathed a sigh of relief. The capsule had not detonated. But the other 3 bombs that fell on land spread a radioactive plutonium across tomato and olive fields. More than 1,650 tons of contaminated soil were removed and sent to the United States. The residents of Palomares still live with the effects of that day. The American government paid compensation, but never formally apologized. The 1904 Olympic Marathon in St. Louis was so disorganized it seems like a joke. 32 runners started under a scorching 90-degree sun on dirt roads that raised clouds of dust. The first-place finisher was disqualified for hitching a ride in a car. The second only finished because his trainers gave him strychnine and brandy, a combination that nearly killed him. Only 14 of the 32 athletes crossed the finish line. What made the marathon even more chaotic? Most of the runners had never completed a race of that distance. Among the participants, a Cuban mailman who ran in dress pants and 2 South Africans brought as an attraction for the World's Fair. One runner nearly died from being attacked by wild dogs. Another suffered internal bleeding from the dust. And the most absurd, the organizer limited water stations to study dehydration. October 30th, 1938. Millions of Americans tuned their radios and heard a phrase that would change the night forever. Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program to bring you a special bulletin. Martians have landed in New Jersey. Orson Welles, at just 23 years old, was adapting H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds for radio, but many listeners missed the initial warning that it was fiction. Panic spread, people fled their homes, phone lines collapsed, police were called across the country. The next day, Orson Welles faced a flood of reporters. He swore that no one involved in the broadcast imagined the program would cause such hysteria. "We deeply regret it," he told the cameras. But the newspapers did not forgive. Major newspapers dedicated the front page to the panic. Police officers reported desperate calls from people who swore they had seen alien ships. The 1-hour broadcast revealed something disturbing about human psychology. When we trust a source, we are willing to believe anything. During World War II, the United States developed one of the most insane weapons ever conceived: incendiary bombs carried by bats. Project X-Ray cost $2 million and had a plan that was simple in theory and completely crazy in practice. Thousands of bats would be captured, equipped with small explosive charges tied to their bodies, and released over Japanese cities. The idea was that the animals would hide in rooftops and attics before the bombs detonated, starting thousands of simultaneous fires. It seemed absurd, but it worked. It worked too well. During a test at a military base in New Mexico, the bats were released for a controlled demonstration. The problem? They escaped ahead of schedule. They hid in hangars and structures of the American base itself and set everything on fire. The fire destroyed military installations, equipment, and even a general's car. The Army created a weapon it could not control. The project was officially canceled shortly after. The atomic bomb ended up making the bats unnecessary. October 13th, 1917. 70,000 people gathered in Fatima, Portugal, looked at the sky and saw something that would change their lives forever. The sun began to dance, spinning and emitting colored lights that illuminated the crowd. Witnesses reported that their rain-soaked clothes dried instantly. Skeptics and believers stood side by side, all looking at the same inexplicable phenomenon. To this day, the miracle of the sun remains one of the most documented and controversial religious events of the 20th century. Between 1956 and 1957, the United States Army turned American cities into biological warfare laboratories without telling anyone. In Savannah, Georgia, and Avon Park, Florida, millions of mosquitoes infected with pathogenic agents were released on the streets. The goal? To test whether insects could be used as weapons to transmit yellow fever and dengue. The civilian population had no idea they were being exposed. Children played in parks, while mosquitoes carrying deadly diseases were released just feet away. The results were devastating. Hundreds of residents developed intense fevers, respiratory problems, encephalitis, and typhoid fever. There were documented cases of stillbirths and deaths that were never officially explained. To monitor the effects, military personnel disguised as public health professionals visited victims and photographed their symptoms. The experiments only came to light decades later when declassified documents revealed the extent of the program. The victims never received compensation. The government never admitted responsibility. In 1968, the United States was living through one of the most turbulent moments in its history, and a group decided that the best response was to run a pig for president. The Yippies, a counterculture movement, paraded through the Democratic National Convention in Chicago with Pegasus, a real pig they announced as an official candidate. The message was clear. If American politics had become a joke, why not elect an animal? The police were not amused. Pegasus was arrested, along with his supporters, but the image of the pig being carried by protesters became a symbol of a generation that refused to take the system seriously. In 1950, the United States Navy turned San Francisco into a human laboratory without telling anyone. The project was called Operation Sea Spray, and its goal was to measure the vulnerability of major American cities to a biological attack. The solution found by the military was simple and terrifying. Navy ships sailed through the bay and released clouds of bacteria directly over the civilian population. The scientists believed the microorganisms were harmless. They were wrong, and no one asked permission from the 800,000 residents who breathed that mist. The bacterial cloud spread silently throughout the city, penetrating homes, hospitals, and schools. The samples included Serratia marcescens and Bacillus globigii, microorganisms that, they later discovered, were capable of causing severe respiratory and urinary infections. In the following weeks, doctors in San Francisco recorded an unexplained increase in lung diseases. One patient died in the hospital with a bacterial infection never seen before in the region. The connection to the experiment was only revealed in the 1970s, when leaked documents exposed that the city had served as a guinea pig. The government never apologized. In the late 19th and early 20th century, human zoos were popular attractions in Europe and the United States. People from African and Asian colonies were displayed in cages and enclosures like animals so that the civilized public could observe their exotic customs. Families brought children. Newspapers published reviews as if they were theater shows. Racism was not just tolerated, it was mass entertainment. In December 1962, something inexplicable took over a village in Tanzania. It all started with 3 girls at a missionary school who simply started laughing and could not stop. The laughter spread like an epidemic. Within weeks, more than 1,000 people in neighboring communities were laughing uncontrollably, some for hours on end. Schools closed, families panicked. Doctors could not explain the phenomenon. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic lasted months and remains one of the most bizarre cases of mass hysteria ever documented. In the 1940s, the quiet town of Mattoon, Illinois, was terrorized by a figure that no one could capture or prove existed. The Mad Gasser, as he was nicknamed, supposedly attacked homes at night, releasing a mysterious gas that caused nausea, dizziness, and temporary paralysis in victims. Witnesses described the same man: tall, thin, dressed in black, wearing a tight cap, and carrying a sprayer. Over 2 weeks, dozens of residents reported the same symptoms. Police investigated hundreds of calls. Newspapers spread panic, but no suspect was identified, no physical evidence was found, and the attack simply stopped. Mass hysteria or real predator? Would you drink radium if someone told you it was good for you? In the early 20th century, thousands of people did exactly that. Radither was an energy drink that contained radium dissolved in distilled water, sold as a miracle tonic capable of curing any disease. Doormad toothpaste, marketed in Germany in the 1940s, promised that radiation would strengthen your teeth. The result? Cancer, bone loss, and painful deaths. One of the most famous consumers of Radithor had his jaw literally disintegrated by radiation. The era of the miracle cure claimed its toll in lives. 5 training aircraft from the United States Navy, TBM Avenger models, took off from Florida on December 5th, 1945. A simple navigation exercise, nothing secret, nothing risky, 14 men on board, experienced pilots, clear skies. But during the flight, the squadron leader began reporting that the compasses were not working, that the sea did not look normal, and that they were completely lost, even flying over an area they knew well. The last transmission was confused. Then, silence. A PBM Mariner seaplane was immediately sent to search for the 5 missing aircraft. 13 crew members on board, rescue equipment, fuel for hours of searching. 20 minutes after takeoff, the rescue plane also vanished, No wreckage was found, no bodies recovered, no definitive explanation. 6 aircraft, 27 men, all disappeared over the Atlantic on that same day. The case became the most famous incident of the Bermuda Triangle. Before founding one of the most controversial religions in the world, L. Ron Hubbard accumulated naval failures that border on the comical. During World War II, commanding a Navy vessel, Hubbard waged an epic 68-hour battle against what he believed was a Japanese submarine. He fired all of the ship's depth charges, called for reinforcements, kept the crew on high alert for nearly 3 days. When they finally located the enemy, they discovered the humiliating truth. It was just a submerged tree trunk. The log incident was not Hubbard's only disaster. On another occasion, he ordered his crew to open fire on what he believed was an enemy target. The problem? The target was Mexican territory. His ship had sailed into international waters by mistake, and the shots caused a diplomatic incident that nearly provoked a crisis between the two countries. The result was immediate. Hubbard lost command and was relieved of combat duties. In the 1960s, NASA funded one of the strangest experiments in the history of science, teaching a dolphin to speak English. Margaret Lovett, a young researcher, spent weeks living in a partially flooded environment with Peter, a bottlenose dolphin, at the Dolphin House in the Virgin Islands. The goal was to study communication patterns that could help in future contacts with extraterrestrial beings. Yes, NASA thought dolphins could teach us how to talk to aliens. The daily cohabitation brought Margaret and Peter closer in ways scientists had not anticipated. Peter developed what researchers described as intense attachment to Margaret, and began to display sexual behaviors that interrupted training. To keep the experiment running, Margaret made a controversial decision: manually relieve the dolphin's frustrations so he would refocus on the lessons. The revelation now caused scandal decades later. The experiment was terminated and Peter was transferred to another facility. Weeks later, separated from Margaret, the dolphin refused to breathe and died. December 6, 1917. 2 ships collided in the port of Halifax, Canada. One of them was carrying 3,200 tons of explosives. What happened next was the largest man-made explosion before the nuclear age. The detonation vaporized everything within a half-mile radius. A shockwave devastated the entire city. Nearly 2,000 dead, 9,000 injured, 25,000 homeless in the middle of Canadian winter. A 40-foot tsunami swept the coast. It was the day Halifax learned that war can arrive without warning, even far from the trenches. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on business when the sky turned white. The atomic bomb exploded 2 miles from where he was standing, causing severe burns and rupturing his eardrums. Even injured, he managed to return home. The problem? His home was in Nagasaki. 3 days later, while explaining to his boss what he had witnessed in Hiroshima, the second atomic bomb exploded over his hometown. Yamaguchi is the only human being officially recognized for having survived both nuclear explosions. Against all odds, he lived to be 93 years old. On June 30th, 1908, something devastating tore through the skies of Siberia. An explosion 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb erupted over the remote Tunguska region, flattening 80 million trees across an area of 800 square miles. The flash was seen 400 miles away. The shockwave knocked people down dozens of miles from the epicenter. And the most disturbing part? No crater was found. No meteorite fragment was recovered. To this day, scientists debate whether it was an asteroid, a comet, or something we still cannot explain. More than a century later, the Tunguska region still bears the scars of that morning in 1908. This photo shows how the landscape has recovered, but the mystery remains intact. What fell from the sky that day? Scientific expeditions searched the area for decades, collecting samples, measuring radiation, and analyzing the soil. None found a definitive answer. The only certainty is that if the object had hit Earth a few hours later, it would have fallen on a European city. Scary, right? The Germans called them night witches, and they had reasons to fear them. During World War II, a female regiment of the Soviet Air Force carried out daring bombing raids against Nazi bases. Flying wooden and canvas biplanes, they attacked at night, turning off engines to glide silently over targets. The sound the Germans heard before the bombs resembled brooms sweeping the air. More than 2,000 missions, 23 pilots decorated as heroes of the Soviet Union. Jim Jones smiles among his followers, a charismatic leader surrounded by people who believed they had found salvation. In Jonestown, Guyana, he built a community isolated from the world and exercised absolute control over more than 900 people. Behind the happy photos, constant surveillance, punishments, and growing paranoia. In November 1978, after the visit of an American congressman, Jones ordered what he called a revolutionary act. Adults and children consumed cyanide served in vats of juice. 918 bodies were found. Most had no choice. In 1926, someone sent a live raccoon to President Calvin Coolidge as a Thanksgiving gift, to be served at dinner. The presidential couple looked at the animal and made an unexpected decision: adopt it as a pet. First, Lady Grace Coolidge became especially fond of Rebecca, as she was named, and took her for walks through the White House gardens. The animal was given free access to the presidential residence, slept in the couple's bed, and accompanied the family on official trips. In December 1973, a joke on a television program caused a national crisis in the United States of toilet paper. Host Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show made a joke about a supposed shortage of the product. The next morning, millions of Americans rushed to supermarkets and bought all available stock. The shelves were empty within hours. The shortage that did not exist became real because people believed in it. Carson publicly apologized, but the damage was already done. On February 5, 1958, an American bomber took off carrying a hydrogen nuclear bomb for a routine training exercise. Nothing abnormal. At the time, flying with nuclear weapons was standard procedure. But then the unthinkable happened. In mid-flight over Georgia, the bomber collided with another military aircraft. To avoid an explosion on impact, the crew did the only thing possible. They dropped the nuclear bomb into the ocean near Tybee Island. The bomb was never recovered. To this day, an American nuclear weapon is somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic, just a few miles off the coast of Georgia. Near the Rhine River in Germany, American tanks were preparing for combat, except they were not real tanks, they were inflatable. The Ghost Army of the United States was one of the most elaborate deception operations of World War II. With only 1,100 men, the secret unit simulated entire divisions of up to 20,000 soldiers. Rubber tanks, fake trucks, vehicle tracks created by tractors, even real shells were fired around fictional cannons to deceive German observers. The level of detail was obsessive. The soldiers of the Ghost Army included artists, set designers, and sound engineers who created convincing illusions for German aerial reconnaissance. Giant loudspeakers broadcast sounds of tank engines and troop movements. Fake uniforms were worn in nearby towns so that spies would report non-existent divisions. The operation worked. The Germans diverted real troops to face ghosts, weakening their defenses at the points that really mattered. When the war ended, the Ghost Army was classified as top secret and remained hidden for more than 40 years. This is the photo that fooled the world for 60 years. In April 1934, the respected British physician Robert Wilson presented what would be definitive proof of the existence of the Loch Ness Monster. The image ran in newspapers around the world, transforming a Scottish lake into a worldwide tourist destination. But the truth only came out in 1994. The photo was a hoax. The monster was actually a toy submarine with a sculpted head, the work of filmmaker Marmaduke Wetherell. Eilean Moor, Flannan Islands, Scotland, one of the most isolated places on the planet. To get here, you had to brave the North Atlantic for hours, 50-foot waves, winds that knocked men down. Those who worked at this lighthouse lived weeks without seeing another human being. A hard, lonely routine, but peaceful. The men who kept the light burning knew the risks of the sea and knew how to survive. Until December 1900. Something happened on this island. Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur, the three lighthouse keepers who were on Island Moor that December of 1900. When the rescue team arrived on the island, they found the lighthouse working, the table set, the clock stopped, but no sign of the men. The coats were still hanging. Why would three experienced men go out in the middle of a storm without protection? No bodies were found. No explanation was accepted. More than a century later, the mystery remains open. In the 1930s, beauty contests forced participants to cover their faces with paper bags so judges could evaluate only their bodies. The distorted logic of the time considered this objective. Newspapers reported it as family entertainment without questioning the dehumanization of women. A well-dressed man was found dead on Somerton Beach, Adelaide, Australia, in December 1948. Well-dressed, no visible injuries, no documents, and with all the labels on his clothes carefully removed. Who was he? No one knew. Where did he come from? Impossible to trace. The relaxed posture of the body suggested he simply sat on the sand and died. Soviet spy, poisoned lover, secret agent. For 74 years, the Somerton Man was one of Australia's greatest mysteries. Among his belongings was a torn piece of paper with the words Tamam Shud, a Persian expression meaning finished. The fragment came from a rare copy of the book Rubaiyat. On the back cover, a handwritten code that for decades was treated as a spy message. Until in 2022, DNA analysis finally revealed the truth. Carl Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne, he had separated from his wife a year earlier, and she had moved to Adelaide. The secret code was probably names of horses he was betting on. He was not a spy. He was a lonely man looking for his ex-wife. An ordinary family. An isolated farm in rural Germany called Hinterkaifeck. 6 people lived there, 3 generations under the same roof. Days before the massacre, they began to notice strange things. Footprints in the snow that went toward the house, but did not leave it. Noises coming from the empty attic. Keys that disappeared. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. And on one night in 1922, that someone attacked. One by one, the family members were lured to the barn and executed with blows from a pickaxe. Among the dead, a 2-year-old baby and the 72-year-old matriarch. But what happened next is even more disturbing. The killer remained on the farm for days, fed the livestock, cooked in the kitchen, slept in the victims' beds, and then simply disappeared. No money was stolen, no suspect was convicted. More than a century later, the Hinterkaifeck case remains open. The killer died with his secret. February 25th, 1942. Just 3 months after Pearl Harbor, air raid sirens tore through the night in Los Angeles. The American Army, convinced that Japanese planes were over the city, opened fire with everything they had. More than 1,400 anti-aircraft shells lit up the night sky for an entire hour. Searchlights swept the clouds looking for the enemy. The problem? There were no Japanese planes. No aircraft of any kind was found. 5 civilians died in the chaos. 3 in traffic accidents during the panic and 2 from heart attacks. To this day, no one knows what triggered the alert. Weather balloons, mass hysteria, something else. You are looking at Carl Meredith Allen, also known as Carlos Allende, the man who claimed to have witnessed the impossible. In the 1950s, this merchant seaman sent letters to researcher Morris Jessup describing a secret United States Navy experiment in 1943. According to him, the ship USS Eldridge was enveloped by a powerful electromagnetic field during a top-secret test. The official goal was to make the ship invisible to enemy radar. Allen described scenes that seemed straight out of a horror movie. According to his account, the USS Eldridge not only became invisible, it completely disappeared from the Philadelphia port and instantly reappeared in Norfolk, Virginia, more than 200 miles away, as if the ship had been teleported. Witnesses allegedly saw the vessel enveloped in a green phosphorescent mist before vanishing. The American Navy denies the experiment ever existed. The consequences described by Allen are even more disturbing. According to him, some crew members of the USS Eldridge suffered terrible effects: severe nausea, permanent mental confusion, and even cases of men who were literally fused to the ship's hull. Sailors passing through metal walls, bodies mixed with steel structures. Truth or delusion? The American government denies any involvement. Official records of the Eldridge show that it was not even in Philadelphia on that date. In January 1921, the ship Carroll A. Deering appeared grounded off the coast of North Carolina with all sails raised and completely deserted. Not a single crew member was found on board. The tables were set for a meal that no one ate. The helm was broken. And in the captain's cabin, 3 pairs of shoes of different sizes were lined up on the floor, as if their owners had left in a hurry. No storm was recorded that night. No distress signal was sent. The Carroll A. Deering simply appeared, empty, as if the crew had evaporated. The investigation into the Carroll A. Deering lasted months and found no answers. Pirates? Mutiny? Abduction? All theories failed due to lack of evidence. The only trace of life on board was something completely unexpected: a 6-toed cat found wandering the empty deck. The feline was the only survivor, and obviously could not tell what had happened. The fate of the 11 crew members remains unknown to this day. The Carroll A. Deering joined the long list of ghost ships that have defied all rational explanations. A real product sold in the past, a device to keep babies safe in the bathtub while parents answered the phone or the doorbell. The concept seemed practical, but completely ignored the risks of drowning. Before safety standards, convenience was worth more than lives.